Thank you very much, Paula. Welcome everyone again from around the world. Very, very excited to be with you for another webinar, another Agile webinar on Agile estimating and planning. Again, I do apologize ahead of time. I have a cold today, so please excuse the voice, but we will get through it definitely. Very excited to be here with you, and I was very happy that there's 1,400 people registered, and I'm glad that you're one of the top 500 that made it in today. So I think everyone knows my background, so nothing really here to say other than I come from a technical background, and as she mentioned, president of Agile Transformation, agilevideos.com. I hope you have a chance to check out our videos. If you like this webinar, we have a ton more videos, short videos and webinars on agilevideos.com. So, as we have always done, I'd like to engage you in a quick workshop. You're coming to a webinar on Agile estimating and planning, which means you must have some questions related to that. So, just in the chat box, share with me your top challenges that you've had with estimating projects previously. And let's just take a look. Story points versus hours. The scope keeps changing. New technology. Accuracy. Everyone estimates differently. How do we get accurate estimates? Lack of prior data for a similar point. Resource availability. Too high estimate, too low. We're happy to go with Scrum, but need estimates anyway in hours. Story fitting into one iteration. Unable to determine what will be delivered in every iteration. Prioritization, unrealistic completion date, 15 billion estimated cost. Oh, that's a good project to be on. Aligning risk with change, requirements are unclear, working agile in a fixed price. Very good. These are excellent ideas. So just to echo a few of what you've said, ambiguous and changing requirements are hard to estimate. Difficult to predict what exactly will be delivered when, of course, except for the few of us that have psychic powers, which I am not one of the lucky ones. Estimating tasks, estimating does take too long, and we still don't get it right. So I don't know if any of you are struggling with that, but you take a long time coming up with these hour estimates and it's still off. Estimates are provided by the wrong people. So sometimes instead of actually asking the right people that are actually going to do the work, you end up asking the expert, and they sort of underestimate, or you ask a manager, or you ask the architect, or you ask a senior person, and so their estimate's really based on their skill set. Software projects are unique and ambiguous. So for those of you that are on software projects, they're very ambiguous. It's not like, okay, I've got this house over here, I need you to build me another house that looks exactly the same. Well, then I can come up with an estimate because we've done it before. Most of the time, any kind of knowledge work type projects are difficult because the requirements are really in someone's head and they're ambiguous and they're not even complete in their head yet. Business customers promise unrealistic deadlines, then they tell the team to just make it work. So how many of you feel that pain of business customers or the marketing department or sales department or someone in management giving someone a date and really with no background in terms of the capacity, the scope, all of it. So that's usually very hard to do. Commitments are signed based on high-level estimates, so signed off on based on high-level estimates. And so when there's normally different levels of estimation. When we're providing the initial rough high-level estimate, boom, that's actually put on the contract and sealed. It's very interesting when you're on projects that are fixed scope, time, and budget. So like that triangle is all non-negotiable. That's actually very challenging. And then estimates are expected to not change, which is really funny because the word estimate means that it's going to change, but they're expected not to change, right? So hopefully you guys agree with a few of those, and you had a bunch more that were really good. So the problem with traditional estimation is we are trying to give detailed commitments, we're trying to do that, and estimates when we know the least about the project, and that's at the beginning. So we don't know much about the project yet. It's probably the highest risk time. Requirements are extremely ambiguous, but that's when we want to commit to a final date or a dollar amount or scope or something. So, and I know what you guys are all thinking, but that's reality, Sally. I know. Let's go through this and keep an open mind in terms of some other ways to do it. We're using estimation metrics such as hours and exact dates, when you really think about it, hours and exact dates were designed for precision. Precision is supposed to be used when you have low ambiguity, when things are not so in flux. So we're going to talk about there are different levels of estimation and different metrics that you should be using and different tools, and you need to use the right tool at the right time. So we make promises and dates without understanding the scope and the capacity of our delivery. So again, we talked a little bit about this already, but someone goes out there and promises a date, and the scope is unclear, how many people are actually going to work on it is unclear, and it's a hard date. It's not even a flexible date, or it's around, like, we're going to deliver it by Q3 or around January or February. No, it's an actual hard date. And I do realize that some projects are date-driven, and we've done a lot of Agile projects that are date-driven, which makes sense because some of them are mandates, some of them are production releases that you must achieve. But we're going to talk about different ways to size and estimate that. We waste valuable time asking for hour estimates, and they're going to change anyway, and many times they come from the wrong people. One of the things that we believe in Agile is when I've got a story, and in order for the story to be completed, and of course a story is a requirement, so as a user I need to log into the system so I can access my account. So that's an example of a requirement that's software related. As the XYZ department, we need to come up with our existing fulfillment process diagram so that we can identify the gaps. That could be a story that's non-IT, it's just a deliverable. The problem with our estimates is many times that story is being completed by many different people, and a lot of those different people have their own hour estimates. So how do you really upfront, without getting more detailed requirements, figure out how long it's going to take each person to get it done? So we'll start talking about all of this. So, I'm not going to cover this in detail. I think all of you know there's a lot of statistics around project failure rates. Respondents to the survey said, and they managed $200 million in projects every year. They said approximately 37% of them are at risk, which is about 74 million. And then 145 senior global executives for Fortune 500s were asked about project success, and they said 20% of them said only 50% of the projects actually made it. Most of the other 50 were later over budget, and 13% of them felt that their projects had actually delivered based on the promised features and functions. So it's not just being over budget and being late. Only 13% actually found that the value that they wanted out of the project was delivered. So, we don't have to dwell on this, but the statistics they're telling us we have a problem. We have a problem with the way that we estimate. We have a problem with requirements. So we're going to brainstorm today some solutions or ideas. This is the cone of uncertainty. It's a very famous traditional, it's been out there for a while, and what it says really is that when you're coming up with any estimate at the very beginning of a project, at the initial concept stage, and even if you're doing Agile, for example, you're at the business case initiation, over here your estimate could be off by 4 times as much, right? So whatever estimate that you give up front over here could be this much far from reality. If you are doing the estimate over here, for example, after release planning, or in traditionally just after requirements gathering, and of course you're going to try to do detailed requirements gathering, you're still this far off. In Agile, what we try to do is we don't spend a lot of time on requirements gathering. Typically, if I have a 1-year project, requirements gathering within that 1 year could take up to 3 months for that specific example. In Agile, what we would do is we would just spend about a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks doing release planning, and then we would try to get 1 or 2 or 3 iterations within that same time period. So within the same 3 months that you're doing requirements gathering traditionally, we would have done release planning and iterated a few times to actually see some results. The reason that we do that is because in Agile we believe that you can come up with an estimate over here. And of course you can come up with an estimate over here, and it's very high level. So I hope to God no one's actually putting this on paper. But if you are, then you have to realize how far you might be, because all this has not happened. There's not a lot that you know about the project yet. This was very much a rough guess. Release planning, definitely we re-estimate again and sort of actually come up with sort of an initial estimate. And then, generally speaking, after the first 3 or 4 iterations, after a few iterations, we have so much more knowledge around the project and around the actual team velocity. And that's really when we update the estimates again and say, look, this is really what it's going to take. Now, does that mean that we can't have a fixed date? No, of course we can have a fixed date. Or we can have fixed points. Fixed points is specifically fixed scope. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this cone of uncertainty is something that you should really definitely share with your folks that are requesting from you to estimate over here and not change the estimate. So I like this slide. I created it because it's so true for a lot of companies that I've seen. Marketing, sales, business promises deliverables by a specific date for a specific scope. Periodically, the team provides realistic estimates but are told that won't work. Right, so the team's trying, they're really trying to tell you it's not going to work, this is going to take longer, but no one's really ready to listen to that. So what the business or the marketing or the sales department says, get it done, use magic, go ahead, use magic, just make it happen. Magic is used, and that equals overtime hours, stress, broken relationships because people get upset at each other when they're under pressure, health problems, so a lot of people have anxiety attacks and health issues, stress, right? High turnover, people don't want to stay there too long. Negative team dynamics, what happens are team members start taking it out on each other. When they have an unrealistic plan and unrealistic deadlines, they can't yell at management, right? So they end up yelling at each other, and then generally that causes low team morale. Well, product is delivered using magic and customer is happy. So I'm wondering how many of you have felt that pain and how many of you are tired of using magic. So we're going to talk about what would be some agile ways for estimating and planning, and all I'm asking is that you keep an open mind because, yeah, they are different. They're different. If you're not doing agile projects right now, you're going to feel like, well, this is really different than what we do today and no one's ever going to buy into it. Just keep an open mind as we go through this. The fundamental difference that you have to understand is that with waterfall or traditional, what it's trying to do is constrain or fix the scope, the requirements. And what ends up, unfortunately, always falling apart or not coming in exactly as scheduled is the cost in the schedule. And sometimes the requirements as well. Agile is very much value-driven. What that means is that give me a fixed cost or give me a fixed schedule, right? Just tell me this is the drop-dead deadline, and it could be both of those, right? It could be by this deadline, I can only spend $1 million, and that's all I can spend. Requirements are always flexible. No matter what anyone says out there, there has not been one project where not even one item didn't change in the scope list. Now, I totally understand that we might need to fix high-level requirements like epics and themes, high-level what we're about to deliver. But when you really get down to a story level, and stories are much smaller items, there's always flexibility. There's always room to say, let's do it this way, no, let's do it that way. Do you really need this part of it, or do you need this part of it? Can we do that manually, or do we really need to automate it? So there's not a project where requirements really are fixed, and our attempt to try to fix them up front and get that sign-off is actually a false illusion of control. It makes us think that our project is under control because we wrote everything in detail, but you're not realizing reality, which is requirements will have to change. And what's interesting is that fixing the requirements and getting the sign-off, it actually, it's not good for the customer and it's not good for the team either. So the customer, even though they might want to sign off on it just to hold you accountable to getting all of it done, it actually, they're shooting themselves in the foot, because if they really want to prioritize something higher or lower or add a new item or remove an item, that whole sign-off process really limited all of that from happening. And from a team perspective, having fixed requirements means that they'll just try to get all of it done regardless of priority, regardless of value. So Agile says, you know what, focus on delivering value. Stop trying to focus on having a perfect plan up front and executing only based on that plan. Yes, give me a fixed date or give me a fixed cost, and then within those constraints, let's deliver the highest value possible instead of everything that was in the original requirements document, which some of it might not be useful anymore. So Dwight Eisenhower said, when preparing for a battle, I find that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And that's exactly what you should think about from an Agile perspective. That upfront plan was never perfect and was never intended to be perfect. It is about continuous planning. right? And one of our value statements in Agile is responding to change over following a plan. So that's a very key principle that you have to understand. Now, I've collected my top Agile estimating and planning principles that we teach in our course, and this is one of them. Fix the date or the budget, but always plan for flexible scope. And again, I know that you're going to say, well, some of the scope is fixed. Yes, you're probably talking about at the theme level or at the feature level. Again, I am talking down to the story level and the various acceptance criteria. There will always be flexibility. When you start to slice stories into small chunks, you can always remove items and add items. We avoid detail estimates up front due to the waste and error. So we provide high-level estimates up front, and then we tweak them and we replan and provide clearer, more accurate estimates as we go. Estimates evolve in accuracy with actual velocity data. Our best friend, your best friend from an Agile estimating and planning, is the word velocity. Once you actually have real measurement of what this team can accomplish, then you can really confirm if your original estimates were accurate or not accurate. Estimate size, so figure out how big something is. Measure velocity, figure out how long it's actually taking for someone to get X number of stories done for this team, and then derive duration or points. So this is really critical. So we're going to estimate stories using we're going to talk about that story points and Fibonacci numbers. We're going to watch the team as they execute to see how many of those are they really getting done within a fixed time box. Or if you're using Kanban, it could be your throughput, right? What's your average cycle time or lead time? Then from there you can actually derive duration. How long will it take to get this done? Or if you have a fixed date, how many points will I get by that date? And I'm going to give you guys a couple of examples. Provide a range for our estimates. So assuming that up front I can give you an exact estimate of how many points you're going to get at the end of 7 months is really unrealistic. But based on our velocity, we normally can provide a range. You're going to be between this number of points and that number of points. Use the right sizing method at the right level. What we mean by that, again, if you're doing high-level estimation, please don't use hours. That's a specific, precise technique that is supposed to be used down at the task level when people have that much clarity on it. And again, we'll go through this in more detail. And another important principle is the team estimates collaboratively and periodically. We don't like to have someone else estimate on behalf of the team, the manager, the architect. We want the actual team that's going to be doing the work to estimate and size collaboratively. So they actually come together for an estimation session, and they redo it over and over again as much as we need to until we know we're going to actually make our date or make our deliverable. The team plans at several levels, and so no, there's not just this one place. We are planning at the release level, we're planning at the iteration level, we're planning at the daily level, and so we're continuously planning at all these levels. So Agile actually has, in my opinion, from what I've seen and I've experienced, a lot more focus on planning and continuous planning than coming up with an initial plan up front and then having to execute exactly. There are 6 levels of planning in Agile, and you might have seen this before, and I'm not going to go through these in detail, but I wanted you to be aware of them. Strategic, portfolio, and product planning are very much all I would consider strategic or strategy type planning. This is what is your company's vision or your department's vision and goals, and this is how is your portfolio of projects going to accomplish these goals and align. And product planning is down to a specific initiative level, where you're saying for this specific initiative or for this specific release or product, what's the roadmap? How many releases will it take to really get there? So this is all very, very strategic. But once we have a release defined, so I've got a specific product or project or initiative, and I know that I need to accomplish something within the next 3 to 6 months, then I'm going to start on release planning, iteration planning, and daily planning. So this is where the team really gets involved. The Agile team is really over here, and this is assumed to have been done before they're starting their planning. You've seen this before in some of the other webinars, which is the Agile life cycle. And I wanted to mention that, again, initiation and feasibility, sometimes some high-level cost estimates, you see this over here, high-level cost estimates are provided, but this is really almost at the business case level where we're trying to figure out, okay, is this $1 million project or a $10 million project? It's really high level. And the requirements are not even there enough to justify it. But it's sort of almost enough to have a go, no-go, approve, don't approve this project. Once the project is approved and a team pulls it into their backlog, the team says, we have the capacity to get this project done, let's go ahead and pull it, or a team is assigned to it, then release planning begins. And release planning is where you actually are developing a much detailed backlog, you're breaking the stories down into the features, and those big epics are being broken down to the story level. You're prioritizing and ranking them based on business value, dependency, and risk. Now you're sizing story points, so you're saying, okay, for this backlog, here's how many points I think each item is, so much detail level than here. And then you're developing your initial release plan. And if you remember, I'm going to just take you here to an example release plan, and I know we've showed this before, but again, this was an example of a backlog that the team had developed, and this team basically grouped all their stories into features, and they have a release plan that they came up with, and the release plan basically says, okay, here's iteration 0, here's what we think we're going to get done, here's iteration 1, here's what we think we can get done from that backlog. And of course, at that point, you're not going to really have the actuals yet. This is just sort of high level. Some teams do it to this level of detail, all the way to a move to production date from a release planning perspective. Some teams only plan out the next 2 or 3 iterations. Some teams only plan 1 iteration at a time. I'm probably more of a control freak in that if I actually have a deadline, a date that's coming up within like 6 months or so, I do like the team to at least begin to sketch out, knowing that it's going to change, but sketch out where do they think everything's going to go, knowing that we're probably going to add new stories, we're going to remove stories, we'll probably reprioritize, re-rank. I just want to know that the current backlog that we have is actually even going to fit in here or not. So typically during release planning, before we have any execution data, we'll just sort of map up a full release plan. But again, it all depends on your project, how much you need to develop. Now what that release plan gives you is it does sort of at a high level give you how many iterations this team thinks they will need based on their estimated velocity. And I'm saying estimated velocity because they haven't executed yet. So they really don't know how many iterations it's going to take them. But they're just saying, based on our best estimate, based on taking these 5 stories and trying to get them done in the next 3 weeks, we think our estimated velocity is about 20 points per iteration, so let's go ahead and figure out how many iterations we're going to need. So that's really what you're getting out of release planning. It is still an estimate, and it is still not based on any actual facts yet, but it's way better than this, and it's way better than taking 3 months of requirements gathering before you provide an estimate, because trust me, even after your 3 months, you still just have a high-level estimate. You still don't have any numbers that are real. So release planning typically takes, maybe a week, 2 week, 3 week, depending on the size of your project. And then the team goes through iteration 0, where they set up the foundation, and they begin to execute. This is where the magic happens, right? When the teams begin to execute, and assuming that you're doing Scrum, they've got these fixed iterations and time boxes, and they're beginning to collect some data on how they're doing, like how many points they're actually getting done. This is what we want, because until the team actually gets work done, everything's just really an estimate, it's a guess. So once we watch the team execute for 2 or 3 or 4 iterations, typically I normally say it's got to be at least 3, at minimum 3 or 4. Now we have something emerging. And what's actually emerging, when you really look at it over here, so this team thought they were going to get 18 points done generally, that was their estimated velocity. They actually only got 10 points done after this iteration, iteration 0. And over here, they thought they were going to get 15 points done, but they actually got 18 points done because they finished something that was a carryover. And when you look down over here, the team got another 15. So now you could almost say, 15, 18, 10. That's what they've been doing so far. I wonder what my average velocity is. Do you think this team in the next iteration is going to get 25 points done? Probably not. They're probably, if you're really trying to estimate based on their average velocity, it's probably going to be something where you're going to take the 15, 18, and 10, add them to each other, divide them by 3, and you'll get something in the middle that probably is around that 15-ish, is a better estimate to use. So that's why we need execution data, is because we can then really provide much better feedback. Now, some people say, well, does that mean that Agile won't give me an upfront estimate like a waterfall project does? yes, we can have a release planning session and we can figure out how many iterations it's going to take, and that will give you an initial cost. Update the cost estimate. All we're saying is, would you like to know the truth? Once the team is actually executing, would you like to know how it's really going, and where, if we think we're going to fail or if we're going to make it, or if we need to make adjustments quickly? So we're giving you much more data here through execution. So again, this is life cycle is really just an example. If you have minor projects, enhancements, support kind of projects, you really don't go through all of this. You're going to use a much lighter, probably Kanban or a much lighter life cycle. So here's the example of our backlog. And so web portal site was a theme, which means it's a high level, epic. And underneath it, we needed security, profile management, place order, order maintenance. Here's some stories and here's some points related to the stories. And all the points is they're just relative to each other. So an 8 is the biggest item over here. So everything that's an 8 happens to be way bigger than the items that are a 2. And that's what we mean by relative estimating. Relative estimating is focusing on the size and the complexity as it relates to another story. So I know a popular exercise that Mike Cohen has, and by the way, if you're thinking about what's the best book, Sally, that I should go buy on Agile Estimating and Planning, it is called exactly that. It's Agile Estimating and Planning, and it's by Mike Cohen. He's sort of the de facto standard for Agile estimation. So one of his games that he has is called the fruit point exercise. If I gave you a grape, and I gave you an orange, and I gave you a watermelon, and I told you to just size them, give them points, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. You would basically be sizing them relative to each other. Which one's bigger, which one's smaller, right? And that's exactly what story pointing is about. Absolute estimating focuses on detailed, more precise type estimates. And we normally do that in Agile more at the task level, and that's when we really get into hours. So, reminder again, a theme is broken down into features, a feature is broken down into stories, a story is broken down into the details. At this level, we use bigger numbers, right? Even themes and features. We use big buckets. So these buckets could even start with like a 21 point, 35, 50, 100, 150, because they're much higher level. Some people use t-shirt sizing, especially when they're dealing with themes. T-shirt sizing is, okay, is it very small, small, medium, medium large, or very large? Because there's so much ambiguity that spending a lot of time trying to come up with precise estimate is a waste of time. It's actually one of the things that we talk about in Lean is cutting out waste, and that's very wasteful. Once you get down to a story level, however, that's when we can begin to assign points like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, which are Fibonacci numbers. When you get down to a task level, we're happy to give you hours because we know enough about the story, we know all the acceptance criteria, we know what it's going to look like, we know what a diagram, the process diagram would look like, or an activity diagram, so now we can actually come up with specific detailed tasks and provide hour estimates. And I know this probably sounds like we're providing an example here that's very software development, and that's true that this is an example of software development, but you could apply this to anything. You could have any big item that is a deliverable, and you begin to break it down into sub-deliverables, and then smaller deliverable, and then break down that smaller deliverable down to a task level. And so we need to use the right method at the right time. When we're dealing with big epics, items that are really big, in Agile we use t-shirt sizing, small, medium, large, extra large, or very large. So one of the sessions that I was facilitating not too long ago was a portfolio management planning session, where executives in the company came from different departments, and the whole backlog were projects. They were initiatives. They were pretty big items, right? And when we wanted to size them, I just drew this line seriously against the wall and said, this is very, very small. This is huge, epic. It's an initiative that needs to be broken down into smaller chunks. Let's just start putting your sticky notes, which are your actual projects, against this because they're way too big. We've also used this, and this is also called affinity estimation. I've used this with a large program management team that had a multi-year program, multi-million dollars, and there was no way we were going to get to the story level up front. We had to provide some level of a high gut feel estimate, and without getting down to a story level, all we had was a backlog of features. And so the backlog was really at this level. So themes and features, themes and features. So we also sort of we started by using high level, small, medium, large, and then we assigned big buckets. And so our small feature was like a 21 pointer, 35, 50, I think it went to 100 then, and then went to 150. So we designed the numbers so that they were a larger scale. When you get down to a story level, that's when you can use the Fibonacci numbers. And Fibonacci numbers really is a scale where every number is the addition of the last two numbers. So 13 is an 8 plus 5, 5 is a 3 plus 2, and so forth. And these are still relative to each other. Many times when you're talking about 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, next to them I would put very small, small, medium, medium, large, large, very large, and usually anything above a 13, which is typically like a 21 pointer, is an epic. And I actually have a lot of teams that say even a 13 is an epic. So many, in my opinion, wise Agile teams don't accept anything above an 8 in their backlog without breaking it down into smaller chunks. So large is the largest item that they would have. When we get down to a task level, then we can use something called ideal days, which is if no one interrupted you at all, how long would it take for you to get this work done? And if you say, well, I think it's 2 ideal days, that's about 16 hours of effort, right? So an ideal day, a day is really about 8 hours of effort. Or you basically just go with straight hour estimates. So these are precise metrics used for precision. These are different level, higher level used for stories, and these are much higher level estimates used when ambiguity is very high. And so we just sort of talked about the story points versus ideal days or hours even. Story points is really a measure of relative size. Is it bigger than this or is it smaller than that? We're not saying how many hours is it going to take. And that's the first problem that a lot of teams have when they're moving to Agile is when someone's saying, well, this is a 5 and that other one is an 8, everyone wants to go in and say, well, no, how many hours is it going to take then for you to make it a 5? Those are two different things. Hours is really measuring, and that's why hours is very complicated, because when you tell me that, let's just say there's 5 of you out there right now, and I said 5 developers, and I said, how long will it take to get the login story done? And one person says, oh, it will take me 4 hours of development. The other guy says 8. The other person says 1 hour. The other person says actually a whole week because I'm new to this. The hour estimate is really telling you two things. One, it's trying to predict velocity for you. It's trying to tell you when they're going to get it done, in addition to complexity. And we think in Agile you really should separate those two things from each other. Complexity, which is how hard is it, we should all agree on how hard the login story is as compared to the other items on the backlog. A grape is definitely smaller than an orange, right? How many grams or how many ounces does a grape have compared to an orange? That's a much detailed level estimate. So, and as we go through this, you'll see a little bit more why this is a much faster way to come up with sizing up front, and it really eliminates the waste. So some of the buckets that you probably are familiar with is the 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. How do you come up with these points, the story points themselves? Obviously you can just compare items to each other, just say this one's bigger than that one, this one's smaller than this one. But the most popular methods, and I'm sure there's many out there, but I wanted to share with you, one of them is called planning poker. And planning poker is the team would sit around the table and they would have all of their stories written out on cards or on post-it notes. And remember, we're down at the story level now. We're not talking about large features, even though you could actually use this at the feature level, just the buckets are going to be bigger. But mostly it's being really used more at the detail level. So planning poker, the team discusses the story. You know, I talk about what I think about it, you say what you think about it, how hard do I think it is, how hard do you think it is. We don't point it yet, but once we have a conversation around complexity, then we all silently show at the same time our vote. So everyone on the team has a card and they all sort of show their vote. Is it 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13? And then they talk it out. So if you had a 13 and I had a 2, obviously you know something I don't know. You think it's way more complex and I think it's very simple. So then we have a conversation, and the beauty of it is during that conversation a lot of assumptions are clarified, because maybe I do know something you don't know. And so the team revotes again until they gain consensus. Affinity sizing is really what I was just explaining a little bit ago, drawing the line on the big wall from smallest to largest. And then, and this is good with either big items that there's no way we're going to get down to a story point level, but it's also, in my opinion, something that a mature Agile team can use. Once they're really familiar with the project, they're very familiar with the content, because part of it requires silent sorting. So maybe everyone on the team picks up 5 or 6 stories, or even one story, and they read it to themselves, and they go and they put it on the wall wherever they think it fits. And then if someone else disagrees with that person, you don't talk to them. It's silent. You can take that item from that, and I normally have another column with a question mark, and you can place it under the question mark. So that's sort of affinity sizing. And then you really don't have to worry about the buckets until the end and say, all right, let's just say all this stuff over here is very small. Let's give that a 21. All this stuff over here is like medium. Let's give that 35. And so it's sort of backwards, but it's very cool. It's very quick way of sizing at a high level. Complexity bucket is a method that many of our teams have been using for a while, and I'm just going to walk you through the cheat sheet real quick here. And I created a zip file for you that you can download at the end that includes the cheat sheet and that Excel sheet that I just showed you. So let's just say the story that I'm trying to size is, as a customer, I want to browse the list of products. So look, it's just me as a customer, and I'm just looking at the list of products that are already there. I'm not searching, I'm not doing anything. So this is a pretty simple page, right? So from a user interface perspective, do we think it's light, medium, high, or complex? And some of the things we normally talk about, and the team decides on all this, by the way, is, okay, well, if it's got a lot of different fields on the screen, then it's obviously going to be higher. If there's a ton of validation logic, if there's many screens, all these are factors affecting complexity of a user interface. It could be a report, it could be a green screen, it could be whatever, it could be a handheld device, whatever complexity considerations that would affect the user interface, we would put them over here as hints. So for this specific one, let's just say the user interface is medium complexity because it has to, list all and sort all the products. And also, what I know about this story is it has some very sophisticated graphics. Every product has to have a picture, and you need to be able to hover over the product so you can see more of the description. So that makes it medium. The business logic, there's none. So over here we said business logic is not applicable because when you really understand this story, we're just getting data and displaying it. So there was really no manipulation or business rules involved here. From a data perspective, it seems like the data is light because it's just going to go to one database or one table. And then from a testing perspective, it also seemed like it's not that difficult. So I've got 2, 3, 4 story points. I don't have a bucket called 4. So now the team discusses and says, okay, this story is either a medium or a medium large. It's between those two. What do we feel it is compared to those 2 buckets? And this team over here decided, you know what, compared to all the other items on our backlog, this one's definitely medium. It's really not that complicated. So how do you use this cheat sheet? You need to figure out for your own project type, which again, I obviously just took you through a software type project that has web development. We did this one time for a process reengineering project that all they had to do is they came up with their as-is business process, their to-be business process, they did a gap analysis, and then they had an implementation plan. That was their buckets, because that's all their deliverables were, really was just the as-is, the to-be, and the gaps from a process efficiency. Your project may have different buckets. You might be a completely data-centric, you might be a construction. The idea behind the complexity buckets is if the team is brand new and they don't know what the size of any item is, then you would sort of have an initial conversation with them to say, what makes a story harder than the other, and try to take it down to only 4 or 5 buckets maximum, and then say what would make each item light, medium, high, complex, and then go through that as a way of coming up with which number you finally assign. Many of my teams love this approach, especially at the beginning when they're first getting started, and once they mature, they will go back and do planning poker, because they have so much more knowledge and the understanding around the various stories. They've sort of established what their 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13s look like, so it's a very helpful technique. So, we talk about estimating and coming up with the numbers, but then how do we really use them? Once the team begins to execute an Agile project, velocity is really what we're looking for. And velocity is the measure of the team's rate of progress from every iteration. So it's measured by summing up the total number of points that are done. This is so important. It can't be done but. So a lot of teams try to get partial points, which is, hey, you know, you wanted this XYZ report done. We sort of got it almost done. Can we go ahead? It was an 8-pointer. Can we go ahead and get 6 points, and then we'll push 2 points to the next iteration? It doesn't work out that way. It's either done or not done. If you thought the story was too big from the beginning, you should have sliced it from the very beginning into 2 different stories, right, instead of taking it on as one large story. And I think someone had asked a question, or one of your challenges was, how do you get your stories to become the size of an iteration? You know, we talk about this a little bit more detail in the requirements gathering webinar, but the quick hint that I have for you is take any story and write down the acceptance criteria. All the acceptance criteria. This has to pass. This has to pass. I have to verify that this is working. And let's say you come up with 5 or 6 different acceptance criteria for your story. Figure out which ones are the absolute basic must-have foundational ones and see if you can create a story around getting those done. And then take the oddball, complex, no, it's got to talk to this external vendor. When they click on this, it's going to go out there and do this. Take out the very complicated acceptance criteria and see if you can make those separate stories, and focus on getting the simpler version of the story done first before you go to acceptance criteria number 7, which is once in the blue moon, XYZ can happen. So that's just one hint for you, is look at the acceptance criteria and think which ones could we combine into the first story, and then which ones can we make as separate stories, and that sort of will at least begin to help you break it down into smaller chunks. Average velocity is an estimate, and they should really use a range, and then velocity is critical measure for planning. And the other thing to know about velocity is you can't compare 2 teams against each other, because sometimes actually a team that has experts, people that are very, very good at what they do, they actually estimate everything lower. So their points will normally be lower. And a team that has a bunch of newbies that don't know anything yet about the system or about the project, they will size higher. They will normally go with higher estimates. So you would be very wrong to try to compare the teams against each other and think that the team, the newbie team, is actually getting more stories done than the expert team, and so let's go ahead and figure out what to do. That's why we do not compare story points to each other. The team's velocity completely relates to them, the way they size, their expertise, the team members. So what you can compare, what you can look at is how is every team's estimating and then reality. So when they think that they can get about 15 points on the next iteration, are they hitting the 15 points? Are they above or are they less? So as story points are collected and sprints are being executed, velocities being measured, this gives me like an average velocity. Why is that important? Because I can look over here and say, if I have 48 points on the backlog and it takes about 12 points per iteration that we get done, how many iterations will it take to get this done? And you probably said 4. Well, normally you don't take exactly the velocity, you normally have a buffer. In this case over here, this team, it took them 5 iterations to really get this work done because they didn't have perfect velocity. So they had some iterations that were lower, some iterations that were higher. These are from real teams that I've had. So again, you've seen this burn up before if you've attended some of the other webinars, but this is the scope line. This is how many points we had on the backlog at any given point. This was the team's target, what they were hoping to get done in every iteration, and the pink is their actual. So as you can imagine, I was freaking out over here. I was actually starting to freak out right over here because I can tell we are way off. And that's the beauty of velocity, is you would have not known this in the middle of a waterfall project, because everyone would tell you, we're in requirements gathering here, we're in development here, we're in design, we're in testing. Agile forces you to have to deliver something that's potentially shippable. It's not forcing you to ship. You don't have to move to production. You don't have to have it go out there. A lot of people confuse iterative development with incremental delivery. You don't have to actually move anything to production, but you do have to probably at least move it to a test environment or somewhere where it can be validated and accepted as potentially shippable. And in this case over here, we definitely had a problem. And I won't bore you with the details of what was going on here, but we had a serious problem. The good news is this specific project went back up over here, and we delivered all the 111 points on the date, and the 111 points were actually above the original story points. So I would say we basically delivered 10% more of the original scope on the same exact date of delivery, even though we had this risk. But seeing this chart helped us realize that we had risk early so we could mitigate it. This is another team, and this team was doing well. So they had a small variance between actual versus target, but they finally did make it, and again, another team that also got a lot more done. When you are able to calculate and measure velocity, then you start coming up with some pretty cool charts that honestly your customers want to see. Business folks, this is what they want to see. What did you get done for me? How much did it cost me? Right? So here's the chart up, the story points, and then this is the actual dollar and cost by iteration. So the green was our projected burn rate of how much we thought we were going to spend, and the red is the actual burn rate. And then this could be like your funding line. So we were first funded for $450,000, and then we had to go and get more money at iteration 3, which is interesting because iteration 3 also happens to be right. Iteration 2 is when scope got added a little bit. My friend Mike Griffiths, a good colleague, he has leadinganswers.com's website. He has a really nice chart. It's similar to what I was trying to do over here with my chart, except he has it all together. So the green line is really the cost, which is the dollar amount. And so if it's a thick green line, that's the actual, and then the light one is the projected. So this is, we're a little bit overspending right now. And the blue line over here are the scope, how many points have been delivered. And so we're actually doing better than expected, right? So our actual is higher than our projected. So it looks like from a cost perspective, we're okay, we're close, but we're a little bit overspending. But from a delivery perspective, we're a bit ahead of how many points we thought we would get done projected-wise. The beauty of what I like about his chart too is he sort of says, we finished all the configuration module or theme, we're done with the stock, so you could actually see that we're really in the roadmap, the big milestones, we're at the sales piece right now. We're almost done delivering the sales module. So another great chart, and what we really call this in Agile or even traditional, is this is earned value management, right? EVM is earned value management. So how did you, what did you give me and what did I really get for it and how much is it costing me? So how does velocity help you with planning? That's what we're going to talk about next in the few minutes that we've got left. Velocity basically helps you because you can take the slowest velocity, you can take the highest velocity, and you can take the average velocity. That begins to give you the range of what is really going to happen. So, like for example, if my slowest velocity was here, if the team is only getting 10 points per iteration done, and based on that, I can tell we're not gonna, I mean, if it's only 10 points per iteration, this is the line that we're gonna have to draw on the backlog. Based on their best velocity, let's say they're getting 20 points per iteration done, well, that means that we might draw the line right over here. We can get all this done. Everything below that line is at risk of not getting done. So it would be good to know about that up front. So now take your pencils and your pens and your calculators, and I want you to do this real quickly. If I have 8 iterations worth of data, this is all the velocity data that we've had from this team. And release 2, this is our first release. This was release 1, this is the actual performance. Release 2 has 200 points that is coming up. And by the way, release 2 has 8 iterations. This is a fixed date project. We only have 8 iterations to go. How many points can you confirm for the next 8 iterations? How many do you think will likely be completed? Notice the difference between confirm. Confirm means you're almost positive you'll get that number of points. Likely is something in the middle. So take your quick calculator, and you don't even really need a calculator when you look at these numbers. Tell me in the chat, what do you think is the lowest velocity? What would you use as the lowest velocity number? Okay, so let's just go with 10. If it's 10 points per iteration is the lowest velocity, and I have 8 iterations to go, what are you guys suggesting as the absolute must? We're definitely going to get these done. How many points? Yep, so we're probably looking at 80 points. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. Maybe 10 is way too low. Maybe 10 is way too safe. I would say realistically, you know, even at a low velocity, you probably might go with a 15 as a low velocity number, right? So 15 times 8, you're still looking roughly around a little bit over 80, between 80 and 100. So what is the best case velocity, guys? Best case velocity, what do you think? We're not going to go to the, you know, it can't, and be realistic, it might not just be 30 for every single. I don't think we can budget for 30, but what would you say is good? Okay. So maybe, yep, 20, 25. And I would say 20 would probably be your average velocity. That would be something in the middle. But let's just say we went with 25. What's 25 times 8 iterations? Okay, so 25 times 8 iterations is 200. Is that right? Yep, you guys are right. I've got my little calculator over here. Yeah, Sally should know better. Times 8, we've got 200 points that we can actually get done. So based on this, if I had asked you, can you absolutely confirm that we are at least going to get 80 points delivered in the next release? Would you say yes? Yeah. So we know we can get about 100 points. We can probably get about 80 to 100 points done. If we use our average velocity, something that's in the middle of all of it, and let's just use I think 20. Is it 20 points per iteration? I think would be your average velocity here. So 20 points per iteration multiplied by 8 equals 160. You really are likely going to get 160 points. You're definitely going to get up to 100. But you're okay probably planning for about 160 points of value, right? So why am I showing you this example? Because I want you to see how we basically calculate this. Now, what could really affect the team's velocity? What could make it go up or down? A whole bunch of stuff. A whole bunch of stuff can affect the team's velocity. For example, number of team members, unresolved impediments. If you grow the team, it does not actually mean you're going to get higher numbers. It could be lower. Impediments that are slowing down the team that you're not doing anything about. Unclear acceptance criteria. The team's sort of working on the story, but there's no clear definition of acceptance criteria. Priorities that can still keep shifting, which means you're not doing Agile very well, you're not protecting the team. Interruptions, multitasking, someone who's not very skilled, a new team member gets added. Team dynamics, negative team dynamics usually equals lower velocity. Vacation, sick time, any of these could affect team velocity. And that's why you would be mistaken to take the average team velocity and just assume that it would never change. You would want to buffer it a little bit. So for example, if my team's average velocity to date is about 20 points per iteration, and someone says, tell me when you're going to get this project done, I've got 100 points left, you would be wrong to say, well, let me just take 100 divided by 20, that's 5 iterations left. You need to buffer it a little bit. Maybe use 15 points as an actual average, and then you would realize you really actually have about 6 iterations left to go. So here's my typical scenario. Someone comes and says, I have fixed scope. This is all beautiful, Sally, you're telling me about all this stuff, but I have to get my 100 points. We've broken down the backlog and it needs to be the 100 points. So then what does Agile do? We'll tell you how many iterations we think it's going to take. It's going to take you between 6 to 8 iterations, or 10 to 12 iterations for us to get the 100 points done for you, right? The other scenario is the one that we just worked through. I have 8 iterations. It's a fixed date. So from a time perspective, this is when you have to complete. And that's what the example that I just gave you was, a fixed date, because I told you you only have 8 iterations to go. And so in that case, you're going to tell me how many points roughly am I going to get. Notice that we're not trying to talk about what the actual requirement should be. What we're saying is, hey, product owner, you have about 120, 160 points that we can get done. Make sure you prioritize your backlog and give us the top ones, the top 100. If you want to remove things, or you want to add more things, it doesn't matter. What we're telling you is our capacity is we're definitely going to get to the 100, but we might get to the 160. We're somewhere in between, so make sure you're prioritizing the right way. Okay, everything that you add that's above 160 points is at risk of not getting done. So this is sort of how we talk in Agile in terms of fixed scope or fixed time. Here's another quick example. Planning for a fixed scope. Actually, I don't think we'll have time you guys, when you download this, you can go through this with your team. 500 points, how long, when will it really get done? And then don't show them the answer until someone answers it on their own. And then this is another example for fixed date, just testing you to see if you basically got the basic principles. How can a product manager plan without input from the team? You really can't. The team appears in 4, 5, 6 product. Oh, you're not planning, as a product manager, your goal isn't to come up with estimates. You're really trying to come up with a roadmap, right? So what I mean by a roadmap is, as a product manager, you're trying to come up with a vision of, here's the big chunks of things that need to get done. My desire, based on our marketing plan, based on, oh, thank you for bringing that back. This is the roadmap that we think we're going to have. So the roadmap is really saying release 1 is going to have these key features, release 2 might have this, release 3 might have that. It is your vision of what is the critical piece of functionality that you want to deliver. Now, obviously, you do need to go back to the team and say, okay, is this realistic? For the next release, we were hoping to at least get some like video functionality out the door. So what video functionality can you really give me? What I don't like is when a product manager designs a roadmap, a vision, and actually specifies down to a very detailed level of requirements and comes up with an estimate and gives a date. Then you're not really collaborating with your team. Coming up with a vision and high-level deliverables and scope, general scope, high-level scope is okay, but then need to come back to the team and get some information from them. Yes, the workbook, Diane, is available for download. The presentation's available download right over here from the webinar and from the community of practice. The zip file that I've got over here under Agile Training, tinyurl, has the workbook. All right, the next question is, how do you work out an initial number of sprints that a project will take without knowing the team's velocity? Patrick, the team comes up with estimated velocity. Estimated velocity after they size all their story points and they put their backlog on the wall. What I normally ask the team to do is I'll say, hey guys, okay, you're the team. Can you start picking from the top of this backlog and act like we're in a sprint planning meeting? You've got 3 weeks from now. Which items do you really think you can get done within the next 3 weeks? And so, and by the way, in that Excel sheet, if you guys end up downloading it, you'll see that I have a capacity planning tab. This is new. And what we normally say is, let's just we've got 10 days. Let's say this is a 2-week iteration, and this is the story we're trying to get done. Let me break it down into some sub-deliverables to see how many of these can we actually get done. This is called a story map. And the story map basically at a high level just says, well, if we're going to get this done, we better have the requirements by this date. We probably want to get done with coding here, deploy it. We want to test it here. We want to do user acceptance testing. We should be done by this story on this date. By doing this, or at least breaking down the stories into tasks, you are able to come up with an initial, it's just an estimate. It's not real. It's what they think they can get done, but it's still way better than not having anything at all. So initial estimate you can do during release planning. Okay, let's get some more questions. So we are up on our time. I would love your feedback. Give me your quick retrospective. Did you like this presentation? Was it useful for you? Did I hit all the points that you wanted? Give me your feedback, please, and anything that you were expecting that we didn't cover. And hopefully we will see you in our next webinar in this Agile Transformation series. Thanks for attending, everyone.